Okay, Hemshech Ayin Beis. We're in the middle of Discourse 28, Vayishlach. We're up to chapter 109. And we're in the middle of the story of Lavan and Yaakov, Laban and Jacob. And how the Torah explains the end of Parsha Vayetze and the preparation for his meeting Esav. The conclusion with Laban's story is where they make the covenant. And Lavan builds a mound. Builds a mound of stones and says, I won't cross this boundary to you, and you don't cross to me. So basically the summary of that is that Yaakov's role is representing, he calls him Baal HaTikun. Yaakov is Baal HaTikun, Baal Elam HaTikun. He's the world of Tikun, the world of Atzilus. All the Avos are Atzilus. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Chesed, Gvura, and Tiferes. But Yaakov is, of course, Bechira Avos. He's the chosen among the patriarchs. So he's Tiferes, he's the central role of Atzilus. So he brings Avram Yitzchak and transmits. What was Yaakov's work? Going from Beersheva, which is the Sheva Midas of Atzilus, and bringing it into the world, be Mamshech Alakus into this world. It's Yaakov's role. And Choran means Charen Af, wrath, the place of darkness. And of course, Lavan lives in Choran. That's where he goes and he builds his whole family. And as we discussed, Yaakov's main work, under the radar, Lavan didn't even notice the power of this man, his nephew, that he refines the Tzayin Lavan. Tzayin Lavan, the word Tzayin comes from the word Yitzia, which means he drew out from Levan Elyon, from the supernal whiteness of keser, into Atzilus, which would ultimately, its goal is to transform the world. Lavan thought he had this type of naive little nephew, that just as a scholar, and he's going to take advantage of him, and he did take advantage. 7 years of work, and then he fooled him another 7 years, the whole deception going on. But meanwhile, Yaakov was working silently and making major waves, and then, like the Lashon here says, suddenly Lavan realizes too late what Yaakov is really about. And he says, after he saw what Yaakov be'uvdis, what he had done with all his activities, with the malchus, and that was he's bringing down the world of Tikkun into this world, and the power that he has, the ability to continue doing it to the point of even bringing Mashiach. So he says here clearly, Lavan finally makes a final stand. That he's not going to take. That's the way that the Mittler Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab elaborates the parsha. It's unbelievable. That's the whole end of the parsha. That's why Lavan meets him, runs after him, pursues him. And this cryptic story. What's the story? Making mounds and agreements and covenants, and he puts a gal, matzeivah. He makes a marker or a monument of one stone, and Lavan makes the mound. So the answer is very simple. Lavan saw what Yaakov is about to be able to accomplish. And he's about to go back to Eretz Yisrael. The stakes are high. Lavan of Klippa now we're talking, not his root. Lavan below puts up a final stand. He builds a mountain. What is this mountain? What is this mound? This mound is to block the Amshacha. He doesn't want Tikkun. He doesn't want Yaakov to finish the job. So he blocks the flow. Tries to block the flow. Tries to block the flow, which is a gal. What is a gal? A gal is the parsa between Atzilus and Bria. So in the regular structure of things, the parsa is a healthy thing. What's a parsa? Parsa are the veils, the cloaks, the boundaries that exist in existence. All of life is based on boundaries. If there was no boundary between the food pipe and the windpipe, it would be dangerous. There's boundaries between your heart and the ventricles of your heart, the brain. Everything in existence is boundaries and structure, but that's a divine structure. Those are midas and shiurim that God puts into the structure that's necessary for a healthy structure. And Yaakov is also respects that structure. But he's bringing in also an additional energy, like he says, the same taste of Matan Torah. To transform material world, you need to have more than just the energy of the structure. That's what Yaakov is doing. But what Lavan wants to do is, he wants to intensify the veils. He wants to make, instead of just a veil, wants to turn it into a dark cloak that does not leave, that becomes airtight, that doesn't let Kedusha in. And explains he doesn't want bittul, he's self-absorbed. And beautiful explanation in the last chapter we learned about the taivus of how Lavan translates in our terms. He said the klippa of Lavan is the klippa of Chochmah the klippa and keser the klippa. And he explained those two things as being taivus and kavod. What's taiva? Taiva is when you have a desire, so that's more of a premius dika taiva. It's more internalized. Kavod is this thing that surrounds you. And he actually brought levushim, garments, as an example. Because remember, the whole thing is about garments. That the lover wants to intensify the garments. So he gives an example of people who love, he says, there's shemer esatzir shalei. People who look at their image, they're protecting their image. Image control, he calls this the clip of lovin. He says the antithetical to elikus, because the whole idea of elikus is not to be worshipping your image. Look physically. People who love to look a certain way, they dress, and they sit. He doesn't say stand in a mirror, but it's very clear that their whole business is they're trying to look perfect. What does that mean? They're obsessed with self-image. They're obsessed with themselves. Well, everything that's divine is about putting yourself aside. So kavod is all about myself. Recognition. My recognition. That's lovin. So lovin wants to create, basically lovin represents a world of self-absorption and self-interest, and Yaakov represents a world of selflessness and transcendence. So when lovin sees what this transcendence is about to do to my self-interest, basically the economy of today that's interested in itself and greed and power, and sees what Yaakov could do, he puts up a wall. That's the mound that he puts up. Doesn't want it. You don't come to me, and I don't go to you, basically. Let's create this wall. But the blessing here is that Yaakov already had done 20 years of work. And he preceded Lavan's resistance. So because he did that all, Lavan's block cannot really block out Yaakov's power. He could slow it down and impede it, but it's not a challenge anymore, because since Yaakov worked, like he said, he was already mamshech bli gvul. And it was even mamshech gvul because before he proceeded, he was wise enough, before Lavan built his mound, Yaakov built his matzeivah. You understand how the whole parsha comes alive? The whole parsha, which you read, it doesn't make any sense, this whole thing. Why is he building a matzeivah, a marker, and Lavan's building a mound? And he doesn't say it, but clearly the fact that Yaakov built the mound before, the first time he built the matzeivah, on his way in, seems to be, that's malchus. That means that he preceded the magdim refuah l'maka, basically. So he says that's the point. By doing all this, it's giving us the power that later, like you said, when you launch something, you have to have an initial surge. That's what Matan Torah is about. That's why the beginning of creation, like we learn in Bas Ligani. Why was Ikar Shechina b'tachtenim haisa? Why was the primary Shechina down below, and then the first sin, it went up to the first heaven, then the second sin, second generation, the next heaven? By the way, these are paradigms. For example, these heavens. It's paradigms. And then the Avram started bringing it down, because when you begin something like a chinuch, when you educate a child, you take a child to school the first day, you throw him gifts, you throw him candies, you give him gifts, because you want to launch something, you always launch it with power. That's why we have Tishrei in the beginning of the year, a month full of holidays. Merubah, it's Shvi, from the word Sova, like Mashbiyan I say. You want to fill up a person with all the energy, so when you go into the dark, cold world, V'Yaakov holach l'darkei, right? You have the power that you gain from the initial launch. Same thing here. Before Yaakov holach l'darkei, he already was all, he had amassed and stored up a whole arsenal. And now when he's on his way, here Lavan is making this final stop and saying, no, not so simple. So Lavan had impact. But as he said, it did not have total impact, because Yaakov had already done this. Yaakov had preceded him. And I mean, to me, this, like, you read the parsha, it's a whole different parsha when you hear this. First, we understand Lava and Yaakov, the significance of it, and of course, all this is a preparation for Esav. So this is what we learned. This is where we're up to right now. I just want to add.
What do you mean a preparation for Esav?
Because the next step is Yaakov then comes to Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim and tells him, Im Lavan Garti. Why? Because he wants to tell him what I accomplished. He wants to let Esav know I'm no slouch. I did plenty. And Lavan underestimated. Don't underestimate me. It's a good lesson today what Israel should be doing in the Middle East. But that's another story. So now I just wanted to add a few things. Some things we discussed. I want to just say, just as an overall introduction. Overall point I want to make is the following:
he wants to know who is worse, Lavan or Esav.
He's asking every week this. Every day he asks this question. The teacher will come when the student is ready.
Oh. See, 25, 50 years ago.
You'll have the answer because he's going to discuss it. Just be patient. Be patient. I understand. No, I understand. You sound like the Mittler Rebbe wanted to hear Chassidus from the Alter Rebbe, so he would send his sister Freda, because the Alter Rebbe would explain it to her, and then he would listen in by the door. So, yeah. Huh? I'm not going into that right now. That's another story. I just was at Emes. This is going to be looked at in years from now. They won't even know then we'll have all the peace in the world, right? But Israel, I already said my piece. It's very pashut. Until you have a complete maimin, a believer in God, understands what Eretz Yisrael is. I just saw a video from the Rebbe that said, he's telling the Knesset member, as the Rebbe, what should I say in the Knesset? He says, tell them, what should be the biggest message? He says, teach everybody what is Israel, what means Yisrael, what means Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because if you don't appreciate the real spiritual value of Eretz Yisrael, there's no way you can be passionate and go all the way. There's no way. And the havdol of those, though I don't like to say this, unfortunately the Arabs have faith. And it's misplaced, it's destructive, it's violent, but their passion far outweighs the passion of many of our Israeli leaders. No question about it. And I'll tell you something else. I once wrote an article, I found this, I couldn't believe it. This was back in Al-Qaeda's times. So I wrote like this quote, it said that Israel doesn't deserve the promised land because it's not ready to fight for it. So then I asked the question, who said that? The Baal Shem Tov, Rav Kook, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who said it? Al-Qaeda in their newspaper, in Arabic. I found the translation of it. You understand what they're saying? And it's very true. And, we deserve it because God gave it to us, but that's the bottom line. So why am I saying Yaakov? You have to have the guy in Yaakov. If you don't, it's one thing when there's a peaceful environment, but if it's a war time, unless you really fully believe in your cause, you fight with begrudgingly, which is exactly the story there. They don't know how to finish it.
Faith-based. You need faith-based.
100%. You see, the problem is the religious people are equally problematic because they're not thinking. They think about themselves. They're not thinking about God either. You don't have many people like this. The Rebbe was like this. You don't have people who have a global vision and also have faith. That's the problem. Most religious are parochial and very narrow-minded, and the secular, which are broader-minded, are completely are passionless.
What about the Kippah God?
I don't know. Not many. No. I don't think. No. I think they're more zealots. They're zealots. That's what they are. They have faith, but there's something lacking. I don't know. They don't have a certain broader perspective. I don't know what it is. Anyway. Huh? We're on?
You're not on?
I am on. Okay. So this is the story of Yaakov and Lavan. It plays itself out today again. Listen. What did Lavan say then? Lavan says, here's the boundary. You don't cross, I don't cross. That would be nice. But that's not happening. That's called a true ceasefire. Okay, but Lavan's intention was not a ceasefire. Lavan's intention was just to block out any holiness altogether. I just wanted to say a few things before we learn the next chapter about language. I've said it many times. I'm repeating things I've said before. And that is, the key in learning Chassidus, you can't learn Chassidus like you learn other studies. It's not like the guy tells me, I know there's the 39 malchus and there's 10 spheres. It doesn't work that way. 10 spheres don't go into, it's not technical. Chassidus is teaching us new paradigms, a new way of thinking. That's what Chassidus is, Teirosha Shal Mashiach. What means Teirosha Shal Mashiach? Mashiach is not another state, is another reality like this. It's a different reality, it's a different consciousness. We are essentially egocentric, material conscious people. That's what we are. We have to recognize that. Which means we define things by the moment. We define things by time and space in a very tangible way. Everything is very limited. We don't see the big picture. Chassidus opens up a person's eyes to see a bigger picture, to see the forces that shape us. Now scientists will tell you that's what they do. We don't just look at phenomena, we look at the causes that bring to phenomena. Well, Chassidus goes a step further. It brings to the spiritual causes that shape phenomena, which essentially is really the essence of what psychology is about. You see human behavior, and you look behind what's behind the curtain, what's shaping and making us behave that way. And what can I do to modify and improve that behavior? Chassidus is the ultimate blueprint for that. So when we talk about worlds, the world means nothing. A world is what? Most people think of worlds, they mean planets. Or they mean solar systems, or whatever they mean. Or the world of the world of, what was it, the world of Garp? Or the world of economy, the world of politics. the levels that we talk about in the spiritual world, really we're talking about paradigms. So perspectives. For example, when you say perspective, like the story, the famous story where that example where the chassid is arguing with the non-chassid about God's existence. And finally, at the end of it, he says, I envy you. Because you think about God all the time, the chassid says. And I think about myself all the time. Which he thought it was a compliment. Later he discovered it's an insult, because I think about God all the time, you think about God all the time, because you know you exist. So you wonder whether God exists. So you think about God. Whereas the chassid thinks about himself all the time, because he knows God exists. That's a given. So he wonders whether he exists. These are two different paradigms. It's not just semantics. What's reality? Is the reality what the eye sees, or is reality the forces that shape existence? So this helps us look at the different reality, but it's a constant battle, because the natural inclination of a human being is to think in very empirical, and we use our sensory tools. Just to give you an example, how powerful. This would be, in my opinion, the first class I would give to anyone learning Chassidus, whether they're 14, 15, 16. First class would be this. I would have them have an exercise in how trapped we are, in our language and in our perspectives. Here's a perfect example. We have 5 senses. They're called eyes, ears, taste, touch, and smell. And so you ask somebody, can you tell me something that does not fit into the 5 senses? You'll find most people are hard-pressed initially to say, because everything, I either see it, I hear it, I taste it, I touch it, and smell it. Especially younger people. So let's do this type of intellectual exercise. Let's say you shut off all your 5 senses. Close your eyes, you shut down your ears, no taste, touch, and smell. Now obviously leave a little of your ears open, because you got to hear what I'm going to say. But you know what I'm trying to say. What would happen to you if you shut down all your senses? I've tried this. So usually 14-year-olds will say, well, that's being asleep. And then another smarter 14-year-old says, one second, your eyes are closed, but you're dreaming, so you're still seeing things. That's their thing. You're breathing. And it's a good exercise, because people don't usually think, because our eyes, thank God, healthy people, their senses are always awake. They're always stimulated. Actually, we're overstimulated senses. So what would you be like if you shut down your senses? Well, you know what you'd be like? You start finding out who you really are. What your real thoughts are like. What your feelings are like. And then that makes it, so that brings you to people, to the world of thoughts and feelings. And then you say, let me ask you, is a thought and feeling fit into sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell? You don't see a thought. You don't feel a thought. You don't see it, you don't hear it. You don't taste, touch, and smell it. So how do you relate to it? So right away it forces you to start thinking, 1 second, it's true. I don't see love, but I know I feel it. What's a feeling? What's a thought? So right there you're taking someone from a paradigm called sensory paradigm to a suprasensory paradigm. And you can climb the ladder. You can teach people in thought itself. Let me ask you have now a conscious thought. But what about the millions of ideas that are in your brain you're not thinking about right now? Oh, that's true. That I'm not even aware of that. So in other words, how many other things are you not aware of that are very real? So you start realizing that, when you look at a light bulb, you see the light. But there's electricity. You don't see electricity, but without electricity, there's no light in this room. Can anyone tell me what electricity looks like? Well, what I'm trying to say is you force people to get out of their conventional mode and start realizing that the real forces that shape existence are completely defined by different terms. At some point, when you train someone long enough, you start realizing that that's reality, and what we see is superficial. And even then, let's be very honest, even then, you get hungry, all your knowledge, all the years of your training, your stomach is hungry and rumbling, you're going to go back to eating a meal. As much as you've been trained to think in sublime terms. That's how Megushim we are. Now, if someone says, what is Mashiach consciousness? Mashiach consciousness is a world where everybody will be thinking not just about the immediate, but that inner. That doesn't mean they won't be hungry, but they'll understand, I have physical hunger, that means there's some type of deeper hunger. When you think that way, you start realizing, so it's a matter of how do you train people to think different type of paradigm. That's what it is. This is essence of Chassidus. The whole purpose of Chassidus is what I just said now. If you want it in more Asis said, or more halachic, this is understanding Achdus Hashem. If you look at the superficial sensory world, everything is fragmented pieces. If you look at the inner forces, you start realizing Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence. You start realizing that everything are pieces in a bigger puzzle. You come to realize the unity of the divine in existence. Now, this takes work. This takes, first of all, cognitive work, and then it takes emotional work. So I just wanted to say this. So language is critical, because the language you use and I use, we're using, is either going to trap us or going to free us. That's why I said before. For example, when I say the word love, I don't need to explain anything, because everybody immediately has had love in their lives, and has love to children, to family, to spouse, to parents, whatever. So you immediately identify the word. The word immediately triggers in your mind all the experience of love in my mind. And we all have our definition. Even if you can't articulate it, but you know you've gone. If I say the word hunger, everybody relates to it. Food, cars, Thanksgiving, iPhones, I suddenly say the word Atzilus. So what are you going to call upon? If you have never heard the word, you don't know what it means. Nothing. So if you have heard the word, you're going to call upon some memory of something you read somewhere. But someone say, what is that? Is it like love? I say, I don't know. I mean, it's a world. They say it's a world. That's the extent most people will say, because that's what they read. So if I say the word the keser and levushim, unless you have somewhat processed it, like you processed the word love and somewhat experienced it, the word means nothing. Same thing, kalim, all these things. They're foreign words. So the most important thing is to not just define the word, but to invoke. What does that word evoke when you hear the word Atzilus? What should it be evoking when you learn the mind of the word Atzilus? What kind of reaction should you have to that? Neutral? I can tell you one thing. When I was in yeshiva around 17, we started learning. We had a teacher. I won't say any names. He's a prominent leader today, and quote unquote leader. Not my leader, but he's a leader. And he taught us Chassidus in the Lubavitch Yeshiva. And he taught us Adam Ki Yaakov. That's one of the classics that they teach for some reason, beginners, or the younger guys. Adam Ki Yaakov L'kutei Torah. And till this day, I have to tell you, I still have a knee-jerk, nauseating feeling in my stomach every time I hear the word Adam Ki Yaakov and Asus Lil Tata Asus Lil. I mean, till this day. We're talking about 40 years later. Why? Because he taught it in the most boring possible way. Couldn't be more boring. It was 7 o'clock at night when the whole thing moved. Can you? No, someone go there. Go for it. Yeah. So he taught it at 7 o'clock at night when we couldn't wait to get on the bus to go home, hungry, a long day in school. You all know the feeling. Yeah. And remember, it was like a drone. You ever fall asleep halfway and the mosquito comes in your ear and like you can't get rid of it? That's how Asus Lil Tata, Asus Lil, Asus Lil, Asus Lil Tata. So now when I read the words, I have to always I had to go to years of therapy for this, to be honest. That's a joke. But the point I'm trying to make is that these impressions make a very big impact and it becomes very difficult. So what is Atzilus supposed to evoke? So I mentioned, go to Perek Tzadik Hey and you'll see. It says Atzilus. The word means etzel, means close. That's what Atzilus means. Another word for Atzilus is emanation. And that's all. But where's the original? Moshe came to Hashem and said, the Jews want meat. Pasha Ba'aleischa. And he says, but Ayin Beis, where do I have meat from? So Hashem said, bring the 70s Canaan, the sages,
But they had hundreds of thousands of cattle. They had cattle with them. So why did the Shiloh of Moshe, where should I get meat from?
You ask me a kasha on the psukim. You could look it up. Yeah, of course, that's the whole answer, because it means I'm a teacher. Right. I can give them Torah. Ayin Beis, why are they coming to me for me? Let them go. Right? Yeah, obviously. So Ayin Beis. So Hashem says, Vatzalti min haruach. He takes the 70 skenim, the 70 elders, and says, Vatzalti, I will impart from your so-called power through them. And they will become so-called, you'll delegate through them. Which of course, this is the root in the Torah for the word Atzilus. That's where it comes from. So the question is, what exactly? First of all, why have to impart from Moshe? Why can't Moshe himself do it? And why? Because everything has to come from Moshe, because Moshe is the source of all hashpahas. So Atzilus becomes, I'm not going to go through a whole discussion on Atzilus because we learned this already. We learned what I just said. But Atzilus is the interface. We have to thank Atzilus because Atzilus creates a bridge between our meat and Moshe Rabbeinu, basically. Or our meat and the divine source of meat. Because what's the connection? Divine source of blessings is not material. Atzilus is a world of structure, but it's a divine structure. Or the way he put it is, without Atzilus, we would not have any knowledge of God, and we would not have a feeling of godliness. Take away Atzilus, we'd have what love wanted. A material world where maybe we can be ethical, but we'd be like animals. Basically unaware of anything that's transcendent. We would follow the rules, at best. There'd be a cutoff between us and the divine. So when you hear the word Atzilus, what should it evoke in you? Thanksgiving. That's what it should evoke. Thanking God, and thanking that we have a level, a dimension, a paradigm with which to work with. That is a model for us of how to grow. I mean, that would be, and this would be my challenge to anyone studying Chassidus. I'll give you 5 words, and tell me what feeling does it evoke in you. And go learn. We'll talk about which chapters. How do you express it in your life? That to me is real learning of Chassidus. How does that level express it? What tzimtzum? Tell me, give me a tzimtzum. Now tzimtzum is not so difficult. Many people can describe tzimtzum in their lives because it's happening, every time things don't work out. It's all concealed. I wake up and I feel depressed. That's tzimtzum. Yeah. Toihu is also for. Okay. So that would be the exercise. I'll just repeat that. The exercise of taking 5 words or taking words, even for yourself, even with your children. You want to teach your children a little Mashiach? Take a word in Chassidus and help them understand from young age what that word evokes. Just like love evokes something, Atzilus should evoke. And so should Bria, and so should Malachim. Even the word Rebbe. I'm just thinking about it. I'd love to see what does Rebbe evoke in most people, in words. It's interesting. You'll find very different experiences, which will explain a lot of our differences of how we define what Rebbe evokes. What does the word Rebbe evoke in you? I know it evokes in me. And what does the word Mashiach evoke in a person? Now, I deal as a communicator and a writer. I teach. I always am thinking, when I say a word, what is it going to evoke in people? And I know that many religious words don't evoke positive things, including Mashiach, including God, including Torah, because most of their limited experience with it was very negative. Which doesn't mean I'm not going to compromise what I want to say, but I'm going to definitely change my words because I want to communicate. So it's all about that. It's all about finding the right words. And Chassidus is meant to really, ultimately evoke within our souls, deeper perspectives and deeper paradigms that we can grow toward. And
had a substitute word for God, Torah.
Yeah. I did it in my talk. Yeah. You never heard this one from me? I said it so many times. You never heard this? My early years when I taught many years ago. So I realized I was sitting there with a beard and a yarmulke, and most people that my class, were people from the arts and entertainment industry, and they were hardly traditional, but they were very spiritual. For all kinds of alternative methods. Let's put it this way. Yeah, like the Rebbe said, better have a Jew without a beard than a beard without a Jew. You ever hear that one? Yeah. So I decided an experiment. You know what? Being I don't know what stereotypes, I may be reminding one guy of an angry grandfather that schlepped him to synagogue Yom Kippur, or irrelevant Hebrew school teacher, or a guy that cheated him in business. All this stuff. So being I don't know what's going on, I decided to use my own new language. I didn't use any religious terms. This was excellent exercise. I suggest it to anyone. And also it forces you to dig deeper. So instead of God, I used the word higher reality, or essence, the essence of everything. What's Atzmus Muz? Doesn't even say it's God. Atzmus Muz, the essence, the core. For the more new age types of groups, I use words like undefined layers of unconscious energy or something like that. And instead of Torah, I use blueprint. Instead of mitzvah, connection, tzafsa. Instead of Mashiach, destination. And I was going on pontificating about reaching the essence of reality using these different connections, following the blueprint, until we get to the destination where there's total fusion between matter and spirit, and between the inner and the outer, and we're totally aligned between what you do and who you are. And people, I'm telling you, were like, wow, this is good stuff. Where'd you get this? After a few weeks, a guy comes over to me and says to me, are you talking about God? You know? And I said, yes, but shh, don't spoil it for the others. You never heard me tell this?
No.
It was unbelievable.
It's on the
Yeah. It was an unbelievable lesson to me. I've never forgotten it. And it changed my whole thinking after that. And I realized words are, we usually think in our generation, we think of words as being connectors, you know. Break the silence, communicate. Your wife is not going to know what you're thinking if you don't tell her. That type of thing, or vice versa. So it's communicate. But there's also words can also be barriers. Letters, we talk about the letters of Lavan, right? So the cloaks. My word, I can use the word that's innocuous to me and meaningless, but it makes you go ballistic every time I say it. Because whatever, your mother said it every time she got angry. How am I supposed to know that? So words mean nothing. What are words? Words is what you turn them into meaning. And I've thought many times, you use the word cheese. Start thinking about the word cheese. You know, cheese could have been applied to meat. And meat could have been called cheese. The word means nothing. I mean, in Hebrew we know words have meaning and so on. But it's a symbol. It's basically a symbol. As a matter of fact, there's even, I once did a study on this. Words that actually sound like their idea. And then there are words that are contrary to what they... For example, the word harmony and tranquility sound harmonious and tranquil. Right? But then there are words that seemingly don't fit. They're like, I have a few words like that. Like asparagus doesn't feel like asparagus. When you, for example. Like what is it?
Broccoli does.
No, but you know. I know that he got up with the equations. Yeah. First he spoke Judaism, but then he got up and made some equations, so they listened to him. Yeah. Anyway, the point I'm making here is that language is a vital component. And any professor, any teacher that really teaches, the first thing they'll always teach you is the first class will always be about language. Look at a contract. The first thing is the terms. You have to define your terms. What does it mean, owner? What means seller? You need to know, because if you don't define the terms, you can write a whole contract and someone make a misunderstanding of what I meant by owner and who's who. So you have to have terms. You have to have your assumptions stated. Anyway, I just wanted to say this for the record, and I don't think it's too late. I think we just have to challenge ourselves. Chassidus is taught this way and learned this way. It's going to be revolutionary. If it gets trapped into words that we just say, you know what, I learned about Mamala Klam, about Matzeivah Klam. Yeah, can you tell me something about them? Like, why is it relevant in my life to know that there's Mamala Klam? I've challenged a lot of times Bochum and they say, how do you explain this? I said, yeah, tell me. I'm a guy in the street, and tell me, why is it so important to know that there's a world called Ak, or that there's Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum and the Esses Sfiras Hagnuzas? So one guy says to me, what do you mean, how can Esses Sfiras Hagnuzas? You have to have Esses Sfiras Hagnuzas. So he's repeating to me. I said, why do you have to have it? He says, because without that, you don't have the Esses Sfiras Hagluyas. So I said, okay, you know what? Why don't you explain to me why we need Esses Sfiras Hagluyas? Let's start with that. And at some point, you get stuck because you're just repeating things you learned. I'm not saying we can't say anything, but this is called the real language and the experience of Chassidus. Okay. Basically, Lavan wants to create a whole bunch of jumbled Asius. That's the gal, the mound. It's disorganized, right? No communication. We're connecting it now. No communication, and wants to create a mound of, what do we say? Throw stones together. Stones are letters, Asius are avonim. But he wants to create basically a block that just shouldn't get through. The healthy parsa is you use a mashal, you use a riddle, you use an example, a metaphor. So you also jumble up the letters, but in it carries the message. So in Bria, like he said, it carries the message of Asius Aksiva. For example, take a pen and you write something down, you can communicate a message in writing. A deeper way is engraving letters, because engraving letters, it's the same mahus. The same stone, which is godliness, has now shaped into letters. So it's like godly letters. In writing, it's not godly letters, but it's at least conveying the message. And what Lavan wants is that the communication should be complete, rubbish, a complete, garbled, there's a word for it, gibberish. Now I want to add one thing. I said I promised I would do some homework. I looked up the Sifrit Kain al Atera. At the end of the chapter, he says here Yigarsa Hadusa. Yeah, Yigarsa Hadusa is the word that Lavan uses from Aramaic. To Yigarsa Hadusa literally means the gal, the mound. Sadusa in Aramaic is Edis. Sada, Edis. So it's the mound, the witness, the mound of witness. This was the witness. Yeah. Yeah. But that's the word. The Sifri Kein Al Teira says it's a gematria. He calls it here gematria Hashem shu chiluf of Hashem Elokeinu Hashem. I should have realized what it is. I don't know if you ever see the words chuzu b'muchza chuzu. That's what it is. That sometimes the Shem HaMeferish Yud Kei Vov. Hashem Elokeinu Hashem. Like in a mezuzah, is written in a concealed way. It's a chiluf. That's what it is, or tmura. It's a chiluf of that. That's what he's referring to, and that's the gematria Yigarsa Hadusa. So, Lavan is saying, "Say God," but completely garbled.
That's garbled.
Yeah.
Where is it?
How's it done? How's it written in the mezuzah?
It's chuzu b'muchzu chuzu, like chav vav zayin vav. It's yud kei vav kei. One letter for the yud kei vav kei is chav vav zayin vav. That's by the way a tmura, not a chiluf. He calls it chiluf for some reason, but a tmura, that's tmura. Chiluf is when you replace ad bash, aleph is tough. Chiluf, that's tmura is you move with a letter. Let's say in this case, yud is
changing one letter for another.
Right. Yud becomes chav, so chuz b'murza. Then that's Hashem, and Elokeinu would be Beis, Lamed Mem. Yeah, chuz b'murza. Sometimes, for example, Maimed. In Russia, they didn't call Maimed Maimed; they called it Nifne, which was also the same thing. It was one letter moved off because they didn't want the government to know, giving the Rebbe Maimed, so they called it Nifne. Mem, Ayin Mem Dalet. So sometimes you want to hide something, you don't want someone to know, and especially if they don't know Hebrew, so you would say instead of Rebbe, you would say Shin Gimel Chaf. Would be one moved off. Shin Gimel Chaf. Huh? Okay, Zayda. This is Tmura. It's replacing a letter with another letter. Many times it's just one letter removed, basically. It's like one of these things, like what they say, Pig Latin and Bop language and all this, right? You speak Pig Latin? You could say, I speak only Pig Latin. Garbled, that's good. So Lavan is the garbled one, and wants to really... Now we go to the chapter Kuftes, 109. The challenge that I pose to all of you, really, someone once, a few years ago, someone came over to me, a few people came over and said, I know you give a class, I'd like you to give an advanced class in Chassidus. So I asked them, what do they mean by advanced? They said, deeper. Let's go deeper. I said, no, that's not advanced to me. That's just more. That's more volume. That's quantity. They said, what's advanced? Advanced means that everyone in the class is responsible after the class to give a class themselves. That we're going to move to another level here. Not just you remain students. You have to become teachers. So here we have a parsha. Try to convey this story of Lavan and Yaakov this weekend, this Shabbos, at your table or wherever. Really, in a personal way. It shouldn't be that difficult. I think if you do it, you'll be surprised what you're going to come up with. Making a suggestion. Hey, we always want to say something about the parsha. This is pretty cool. My humble suggestion. We're moving to another level here. It's 200 years from the Alter Rebbe's Yortzeit. It's time to, Eliezer, right? Time for revolution or not?
Yes.
That's it.
100 years from Ayin Beis.
Right, exactly. It's interesting. Ayin Beis began 100 years from the Alter Rebbe. It has to be a kavanah in that. Meir Shana. Wow. So Ayin Beis is like the end of Ayin Beis, and then now we're at Ayin Gimel. Basically around 100 years. These were things that were very bediuk by the Rabbeim.
So Lavan himself, when he makes his gal, internally, his inner conviction is actually this temuros. He's really a godly person.
Oh, no.
Why would he make it? He would, if he really wanted to jumble it and not allow kedusha to penetrate into his world, the Haran, he wouldn't even put a remez of godliness in those words. He put a remez of godliness in there. So it's obviously intentional, and he's also obviously connected to it. Why would he do it?
It's a good question. I would answer this two ways. Number one, I don't know if consciously that's what he wanted. but he may have known, just like Bilam knew, that you can't defy God. So he knew that at the end of the day, the energy is coming, but he wanted the minimal amount of God in there. So it wasn't, you're suggesting that he wanted really to be able to find God. That's for sure not the pshat here. He clearly says that Lavan wants no bittul. Lavan doesn't want bittul. But he knows, because in those days they knew that ultimately the energy comes from God. So he knew that it's not about complete, total concealment.
Right.
But it's God Almighty. I don't want any godliness in my life. I just want godly energy to live. That's how I would explain it.
Say that he's like that zone in the Tanya, that ultimately he really does want to be a viewer on him, and that therefore he's making a challenge. He's making it difficult for Yaakov, but ultimately he's
you could say that if you didn't read this last chapter, but last chapter makes it very clear it's not the case. One second, I got to say a few things. Because then why does he make it all together? Yaakov made a matzeivah. We already have a parsa. Why do you need more parsas? What do you need it for? That's the problem with that.
Matzeivah is not gibberish. It's not confused. It's not a gal. It's
okay. So you weren't here when we learned the chapter, but let me explain the chapter. The chapter says that the world has its natural concealment, which is healthy. That's fine. Why do you need additional? Why does he want to make an additional concealment? That can only come from a Rasha who wants to conceal. Why do you need additional? We have enough concealment. Bria is already a concealment with a veil that's already garbled, by the way. It's disorganized letters. Bria the Kedusha is already disorganized. And apart from, we have already Bria. And we already have Yaakov transforming Bria. He says clearly, Lavan sees that he's about to bring Mashiach, and he wants, Lavan here is definitely, his intentions are not good intentions. There's no positive in it. It's the Menagid. It's like Hitler. It's like Pare. There's nothing. Now there's another Lavan we learned earlier, the root. The whole thing isn't, but that's not the interpretation he's saying here. No, there's nothing to do with it. It's a different thing completely. He didn't discuss that.
There's power from up there.
That Lavan, by the way, is not the Gal of between Tzilus and Bria. That Gal, he said, is the Gal before Tzilus, which is not. It's a different interpretation. We're talking about this interpretation here. There's another interpretation, that Lavan of Gedusha. The Lavan is keser, Levin Elyon, the highest level, and he builds a Gal in order not to garble it, but to bring from Bligvul to Gvul, and that is a good intention. So what you're saying is talked about in chapter 107. In 108, he's talking the Lavan of Klippa. He says it clearly. This is not my interpretation. This is clear here. So Lavan of Gedusha is the bound that he builds between Keser and Atzilus. I think he's going to discuss it more, but basically what Yaakov does there, Yaakov draws down from Lavan Tzayin there too, in Takudim, Nekudim, Vrudim. He builds Atzilus basically. He builds Atzilus. Lavan doesn't build Atzilus. Yaakov builds Atzilus. Then at the end, when they're about to part ways, so Yaakov makes a matzeivah. He lifts malchus up to basically to matzeivah mezim, and Lavan Elyon makes a parsa to make sure that the flow should be a proper flow. Not necessarily seen as a negative. Right. There, Lavan is doing a positive thing.
How is Lavan Atachon coming from Lavan Elyon?
Because everything in Klippa comes from Kedusha. We learned all this. It's a shtalshel. Just did any of you learn the chapter before? You want me to give you? All this is stated clearly. He says it all very clearly. This. I suggest if you want to answer to this, read inside chapters 107 and 108. It's specific there. It's very direct and specific.
Something called the gallbladder.
Okay. He says clearly on the top of page 106, page 206. He says there's two Lavans. There's two interpretations. There's the Gal, the Losam Bechinas HaParsa between Eid and Sef HaMaitzel. That's a holy one and a sacred one. And then there's the Parsa that he makes between Atzilus and Biyah.
Challenging all your.
No, I don't want. I mean, I have some answer questions in my thoughts, but I don't want to get distracted.
No. Why don't you learn the chapter and then ask your thoughts? That's what I would submit. You learn the chapter and then you'll be wiser. The chapter talks about it. It's not hinted to. This is not my interpretation of the chapter. It says it specifically. Kuftes Ach Yaakov matzeivah v'lo gal. Now Yaakov, however, made a matzeivah, a marker or a monument, and not a gal, not a mound. The negal hen esis habilti musudarim shemalimim vu inyan haparsa canal. Because now the gal, this is a question he asked earlier, why Yaakov made a matzeivah. He wanted them also to make a matzeivah, Lavan. But they made a gal. Because a gal, as we said, are letters that are disorganized. Shemalimim, that conceal. And this is the parsa. This is the curtain, the cloak. Aval matzeivah hen esis musudarim. Matzeivah, on the other hand, are letters that are organized. Shein kelim la'er haseichel. They are containers. They're not a riddle. They're actually containers that reflect, that transparent containers to the er haseichel, to the light of the intelligence. Shemislabish. One second. Again, these are all discussed in earlier chapters. You want me to? And the problem is that you weren't here in the earlier chapters. Huh?
The stones that are just thrown on a pile.
Yeah.
And the stones
Right.
represent Asius.
It's like a riddle.
Yeah.
You get to it. It's like-
Exactly what he just said. It's stones that are just thrown there, so they're disorganized. But this is also discussed in chapter Kuf Zayin 107. Okay. He says canal, like he said canal. If you want to look on top, page 206. There he discusses. The Eisis HaMesudarim, he says, Harihem Keil Meshebaham Al Yodim Nimshach Mizgal Er Kama Eisis HaDibur, Aval Eisis HaBilt Mesudarim Hem Lahailim Er Kama HaChides Ukama Eisis Dikameya Shehen Lahailim HaSeit Shebahem. So it's two different levels. Remember, there's a pass also of Kedusha. There's a chid of, you can have a riddle that's a holy, but whereas, so matzeivah, on the other hand, interesting thing, a matzeivah is only one stone, but he still calls it Asius. I'll tell you why, because there were many stones that were turned into one. Some of the, yeah.
So that's considered.
I looked at Mefarshim, nobody makes the connection between that Evan and this Evan, and it's clearly here, he's definitely, it is. Very interesting.
No,
Many stones.
Rashi is saying it.
What?
That these were the same Evan.
That the Evan by Lavan is the Evan that he took in the beginning?
I think somebody's saying it.
No, the stone that he slept on, that's the stone he made a matzeivah. But later when he makes a matzeivah at the end of the Pasha, you told me there is a connection, you said? Rashi makes a connection. Okay, maybe. Yeah?
We raised that, but we weren't sure.
Okay, we could look it up, fine. But either way, the explanation for sure is here. That's a good...
The first matzeivah, I have the 12 stones became one.
Yeah.
This matzeivah also you're saying?
No. It said the 12 stones became one, and then he took that one and made a marker. Later, it just says he took a stone and made a marker. Question is whether it's the same stone that he made the marker.
Or you said it's multiplicity into one. Because you said if you started...
I was wondering why one stone would be many letters that are organized. So I was thinking maybe. I'm just speculating.
We are the same 12 stones.
I think that does say 12.
We are the same 12.
Not 12, many. It doesn't say many. Yeah. You know, because they
I
argued.
think it is 12 though. I think
I thought every
Because they argued, yeah, it could be. Okay, because they argued about who should lie under his head. So they all became one. So someone asked the question, the question that's asked if why they argue which one should be under his head, even if they became one, it's still only one part of it could be under his head. The answer is, but once they became one, they felt one. They don't feel separate, so it doesn't matter who's. Yeah.
Also, somebody asked, why did they argue? If there would be a pillow, I understand. It was stone. They wanted the Yaakov should put his head on the stone. But the answer is that Chassid wants that the tzaddik should put a head on him. If the stone or not, what he needs, the tzaddik should put a head on him.
Yep.
Ola yanech tzaddik is rishon.
Yep. The inyan of this is the Meorei Ohr Mem Ois Pei Beis. Meorei Ohr is from Yaakov Papyrus. She's a Kabbalist. From the students of the Arizal. It's a very fundamental sefer. It's like an encyclopedia of words.
What's the name of it?
Meorei Ohr. And it has a commentary called Yair Nesiv, where he explains basically words. You'll find it very often in Chassidus quoted. It goes by Aleph Beis. It goes literally from Aleph to Tuf, and it takes words and essentially explains what they are, each one. So Meorei Ohr says Mem on the word matzeivah. Mem Ois Pei Beis Isa matzeivah hakomas malchus mebchinas nekudah la'asei partzuf. Matzeivah, like he just said in the end of the previous end of chapter 107 on page 207. So what did he say? That matzeivah is hakamas malchus. It's lifting up. It's the erection of malchus. Taking malchus could be laying down. Hakama means like it's standing up. Mibchinas nekudah lasese partzuf. So malchus on its own is a nekudah. It's just a point, like a stone. And making it into a partzuf, into a full-blown configuration, a full-blown entity, like a face.
Gets that from itself?
Huh?
Up to keser, malchus.
No, not keser. He doesn't say that because it's actually not keser. Doesn't say that here. No, he doesn't say that here. He specifically doesn't say it because if you read the last mimer, he said that's not that. That's Beis Elikim already. That's the next level.
He gets it from the book, from the word itself, or he just...
No, he's explaining what matzeivah is in a Kabbalah.
Yeah, but how's os, pay base? What did it mean by that?
It's structured. Mem, letters, os pei beis means section 82. Meorei Ohr is structured by chapters and chapter numbers. Chapters and there's number sections.
Chapter by letter.
Yeah. Not by letter. Os pei beis, nothing to do with Ois. Ois is it's how it's organized. It's just it's like saying chapter 1 sub chapter 82.
I was saying like letter mem. Right, that's what I thought. Mem there's multiple.
No. Letter mem and then he has different This is Os pei beis.
Malchus nekudah.
Go back to page malchus is less klum. It's like the moon on its own is just a point. Malchus doesn't have any. It's bittul. It's ultimate bittul. Malchus is bittul. It has no giluyim.
But Malchus is also the one that brings the lower level.
Okay, so we're not discussing but you never heard that Malchus is nekudah? The first time you heard this?
He'll talk about it.
Huh?
He'll talk about it in here.
Well, Malchus is nekudah, very simple. I told you, Malchus is bittul. Less lomer gam klum. So you're asking a question. If it has nothing, how could it create? That's what you're asking me. No, what's the answer? You have an answer?
Yaakov made it a partzuf.
No. It reflects and draws down from the higher levels, like the moon reflects the sun. But the moon comes to a point, by a new moon, it becomes a point where it disappears, and then it's reborn again. The whole Levana is nekudah that grows. The whole moon, the phases of the moon, is the story of malchus. It diminishes to a point of a nekudah, and then, now he's saying the avodah of the matzeivah is what he said, that Yaakov took a stone, and he turned it into nekudah, which is complete bittul, where there's no giluyim at all, and brought into it revelations. That's what matzeivah is. He discussed it a few pages back. This is what Yaakov did. Sheyesh bo Gilead. Now he transmitted that malchus should have within it a revelation. Okay. V'zeh mashas Yaakov esa oven lematzeva, and this is what Yaakov turned the stone into a marker. The even ubchinis nekudah. Even is the level of nekudah. So nekudah. Nekudah means nekudah. Like you say, nekudah sphere of partzuf. Begins with a point. Everything begins with a point. Yud, K, Vav, K. Chachma, a point. Malchus is a point. Begins with a point and then it develops. A fetus, a seed. Malchus is a seed. So it always begins a concentrated point. What?
Before Yaakov, what happened?
It's a good question. What happened before Avram? It's a question you could ask about everything.
Isn't hay from the Yud Kei Vav Kei?
Everyone contributes a piece.
Isn't hay from the Yud Kei Vav Kei in that malchus? Because Yud is Chachma.
The last hay is usually malchus, but now he's not talking like that. He's not.
Then you're saying it's a point, so it's like really Yud.
Yeah. Maybe it's the beginning of the Yud of the next world. I don't know about that. It's the Yud of the next world is what I would say. Fine. So here we go. Yaakov the matzeivah, the even b'chinas nekudah. K'mesher kosev Meorei Ohr Aleph Ois Daled. He's again quoting Meorei Ohr in letter Aleph Ois Daled in section 4, in letter 4. Aleph. The kol even moira al Yud. That every even, wherever it says the word even, wherever it says it reflects, indicates on Yud, on a point. Ukadisa bezeir avna lemishkaba da Yud. Like it says, avna lemishkaba, a stone with which to weigh it. When you make a scale, so you have a scale. So you have like a scale made of like a stone.
Right.
So it's a stone. The Zohar says it's a stone with which to weigh. This is the letter Yud. So it's basically is a point. V'hainu b'chinas nekudah. That means, and that's the level of a nekudah. V'nekudah b'chinas miyut hakelim. Nekudah is the diminished state of containers. There's very little container there. Like I said, it's like a new moon, right before the new moon. There's nothing there. The kelim are very, very few. Ayin Beis Meorei Ohr, bolak al pasuk Shcheira Ani. Look in Meorei Ohr and on the pasuk Shcheira Ani, that I am dark. That's what it refers to. That I, malchus, are completely.
How about the earth? There's not either. There's not either.
Well, let's see where he goes. Which means it's still like a seed. So it's not yet a container to receive and contain the energy. Then comes binyan hamalchus. We talk, for example, in the 10 days of Tshuva. Also, we talk Rosh Hashanah is the birth of malchus, new moon, and then comes binyan hamalchus. Now you have to build up malchus. We'll explain it. Let's learn what he said. Binyan hamalchus. And building up malchus is taking this point and building it up to the point that it becomes a partzuf. A partzuf means it's no longer just one cell; it's become now multidimensional. And now it should be able to receive and contain the energy, the light. Vayishlach the nekudah now keser malchus. Yeshlemer, we can say that this nekudah is keser malchus, not just malchus; it's the keser of malchus. Even though keser malchus is the highest level in malchus, because keser chachma bin and so on, nevertheless it's still not in a state of revelation. That's why it's called a yud, shachrus. Shachrus means darkness. Because malchus then is in a state of receptivity. It's in a state of ascension and leaving its entity in order to be busy receiving. So in other words, being that malchus is a makabel, the keva, so it's instead I did the Torah lemivla, means while it's busy absorbing, it can't be busy transmitting. So when a Talmud is in a state of absorption, there's only a nekudah there. So that's how I would explain it. There's Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hey is how it's already has received, but when it's in a state of this last Hey I'm talking about, when it's in a state of complete receptivity, it's in a nekudah. That's keser malchus is what he's saying here.
What is shachrus?
Darkness. Or Kamosh Kasab Meorei Ohr Sham Shcheira Ani. Or Kamosh Kasab Meorei Ohr Sham, like it says in Meorei Ohr there that he just cited in Bolak, She'ein ze b'chinas Gili Ohr. That's not in a state of Gili Ohr, of revelation. V'hu mitzad heder hakelim. And that's because of the lack of containers.
Not the last light.
Correct. Like he said earlier, chapter 91. What did he say there? Let's see. What's in chapter 91? Just to see. Apirish Abeis. So since there's very few kelim, the truth is I think it's Perek Tzadik Beis. By the way. Yeah. Minute kelim is Perek Tzadik Beis. He says Perek Tzadik Aleph. Fine. I think it's Perek Tzadik Beis, 92. That when the kelim are diminished, therefore there's nothing to hold the energy in. Think of it like the wick. There's no wick, so there's no light there's no flame that can hold. Okay.
That was the Rabbi Rashab that wrote it, right?
Wrote what?
Perek Tzadik Aleph.
Yeah.
Not somebody.
No. I have to look in Tzadik Aleph. Maybe in Tzadik Aleph it's hinted too, but in Tzadik Beis it's beferish for sure. Okay. And when malchus becomes built up into a partzuf, into a full-dimensional entity, that means it's in a state of kelim, in order for there to be a revelation of energy in it. This is lamata b'madregas. He said, I understand. Keser malchus, it's only a nekudah. Now you build up malchus, it's lower than keser. You're going downward. As you build it into an entity, you're not going upwards, you're making it going downward. So even though this is lamata b'madrega, maybe nekudah. When it was a nekudah, it was on its highest state of being. It was completely receptive to the higher levels. Nevertheless, the root of this hamshach, of this transmission, is higher. Like it says elsewhere on the Zoyar Vayakal, page Reish Dalet 204. Hai ruchi iu is pashtusa, the hai nekudah zo davke kad isesiv kachin ubirchon meleila. Okay. Hai rucha means that spirit. Iu is pashtu. What is it? What is that? Defining that spirit. That spirit is a spashtusa, is a expansion of that level of nekudah. Yeah. So it's like an expansion. Zehu. One second, I skipped something. Oh no. Shezehu davke kad yisesu kachin b'china. That when can it become an expansion? That specifically kad when there's an addition of holiness and brachas from above. Mm-hmm. So that's clear. So in other words, the nekudah is essentially a higher level, but for an expansion is a lower level. But for it to expand, it requires a transmission from a higher level that allows it to expand and grow into a partzuf. So you need more kedusha and more brachas, right? Okay. Which is what basically what Yaakov is doing. Yaakov is taking a nekudah, keser malchus, and turning it into a partzuf by drawing down higher forces.
Yes, but when you build a matzeivah, you have to build from going from down to up. Nobody starts from up. You have to start from the floor, ground, up to the top.
First of all, that's just a technicality. I don't think that's relevant here. He's taking a stone and he makes a marker.
But it's building from malchus up.
I don't know if I don't know, but I don't know up and down. Listen, up and down, it depends whether you're standing on your head or not. I mean,
Well, no, the world is built upside down.
no, it says that Lamaila the Yesod, the foundation is above and the building is below. Down here, the foundation is below. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's the same idea. It's the same idea. I mean, it's like saying, does a child grow from the feet up or from the head down? Which way do we grow?
Obviously from the feet up.
Who knows? Like by the way, there's a machlekes. There's a machlekes in Gemara about hair. Does the hair grow? The outer hair grows more, or does it grow from the follicle?
But it's interesting. Yeah. Has to start from the
It's the gate halachas. Let's see.
All of this is in Kalim only, right?
And the kalim draw more energy when the kalim expand.
But not in the oil, right? You said the nekudah in the spashus, everything is in the Kalim.
But that draws more energy. When there's more kalim, there's more energy.
So, but yeah.
Always around.
Okay. And we can say that this is why it's called kima. It's called a lifting or an erecting of. Kima means when someone wakes up and they stand upright, basically. It's being lifted upright. Uplifted. Yeah, that's the right word. Being that it's through a transmission of a higher energy, that's why it's called kima. Maybe that's what he's answering your question. In other words, malchus on its own is a nekudah, and lifting it up, that's because that's why it's called lifting it up, because it's a transmission of a higher energy. And look there in the Maimer Hazair, that Zayah dispashtusa dahay nekudah, that the expansion of that point, Zehu b'Shabbos. That happens on Shabbos. Zehu b'chinas malchus me'ira b'biyah. Because on Shabbos, malchus radiates in biyah, shalei de hefsek v'helam apasa, not through any concealment block, through any veil and concealment, through any hefsek, through any stoppage. And helam haparsa of the curtain. So that's the level of interruption, right? That's the level of Shabbos. That's when malchus radiates in biyah. V'sham shu'ay de maiver haparsa loy bislapshus. And there in that maimer hazehar on Vayakal says that this is maiver haparsa. It's only through passing through the curtain, not islapshus. V'u'inyan ma'yofim pamayich. Oh, that's Nalayim. Okay, that's the Mayafa. How beautiful Pamayach are your bells, footsteps. Yeah, how beautiful are your footsteps? Which is from the shoes. Aha, that's the pshat. Okay, let me explain. Maiver Islapshus. Maiver Islapshus. I'm sorry.
How could it be without a parcel?
Are you disturbed that something can be without the parsa? I mean, so the difference in maiver and slapshus goes like this. The maiver and slapshus is two ways that things are transmitted. One, it's only passing through, and the other is that it assumes the properties of the thing it's passing through. One is like a mashpach, like a funnel. So funnel, let's say you funnel wine from a barrel into a bottle. It doesn't change the personality of the wine, it's just channeling it. So it's maiver. Slapshus means that it manifests, it gets enclosed in the interface, and therefore that an example is given for this of example the way the brain conceives of ideas. That's slapshus. And the way when you write the idea on paper, it's only maiver. Your fingers don't get intelligent. Your fingers are just instruments through which intelligence is passing through. That's the difference between maiver and slapshus. It's brought very often, this discussion around, for example, by when the kedusha comes in the Mishkan. Did it remain there or did it not remain? If it's b'derech maiver, it usually does not remain and there's no impression left. So when they travel through the wilderness, the Mishkan, the places, that was only for the time, and then they moved on because it was more maiver. When it came to Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, then the Meshchina manifested in an internal way, slapshus, and that's why even today, after the destruction, kedusha le'zazim imkema, holiness remains there. So generally, something slapshus is more internalized, integrated, and has an impact. Both the energy has an impact on the thing it's manifesting, and the thing that it manifests in has an impact on the energy. Maiver is much more of a just passing through type of thing. Like I remember there was a bunch of guys came to our Shabbos table. My father asked them, so are you tourists or are you residents? You're passing through or are you, he didn't mean whether you live here. He meant to say, it's just a spectator, right? A sightseeing trip or something more slapshus. And each one has its own maila, slapshus and maiver. So what he's saying here, basically, he's just explaining a little more this whole malchus thing. That malchus expansion comes from a higher level, the Zohar says. He says that's Shabbos. That's when malchus goes upright, because malchus shines through. So he's saying this malchus that goes Shabbos, goes through the biyah, it goes through the parsa. So 6 days of the week, it goes through the parsa, and the parsa affects it. So the energy flows through, and the veils and the curtains actually cloak and somewhat shield the flow. Shabbos, it's just passing through. It's a much more intense energy. So it passes through the curtain. It always has to pass through the curtain, but it's not affected as much. It's more b'derech maiver. It's just like passing through without really being impeded. It's almost like the difference between heavier shades and not such heavy shades. So the shade is the same, but the energy of Shabbos is just much more of a powerful energy.
It's a higher energy.
Yeah, so that's why this, curtains can block out a certain light, but if it's a much more intense light, and like a spashtus of malchus, not just the nekudah, then it's much more expansive and more revealed, basically. That's what he's saying. And that's my yofa pamayach. How beautiful. Remember he said before nalayim, he said that the levushim, the garments, are what cloak. But there are garments that block out, and there are garments that let something shine through. On Shabbos, my yofa pamayach, how beautiful are your footsteps, means that it shines through. And then the shcheirani, when it feels dark, and you don't sense the revelation. It's just different levels of how much the shine is coming through. And that is because the root of the hamshacha, of turning a nekudah into a partzuf, taking the point of Evan, turning it into matzeivah, a marker, that comes from a higher level, atik. Since it comes from atik, which as we shall learn is probably Levin Elyon, that is what gives it the power. So even though it's a lower level than the nekudah, matzeivah, but matzeivah is rooted in a far higher level that, like he says, kaddishin. He says kachin, ubrachin ilah. Kachin could be even kaddish, maybe. Not just holiness, maybe the kaddishim that we say. And many more brachas.
In Pashas, he means kedusha.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, that's that. This is a little Kabbalah we're learning here, but it's the levels that we're discussing, the whole levels of how, as we'll see, malchus, remember, is where the kalim misper. Spheris misper is primarily in malchus. So malchus is being elevated. So you're really bringing into misper, hakelim, you're bringing the energies all the way to the bligvul, which is what Yaakov does.
And how does this relate to us in our life? What we're talking about?
I'll explain it after we finish the whole thing.
So why is the Shabbos
These are the actual levels of what we said before. He's really just explaining. He's basically explaining how, the garments, how much flow comes through it. But we'll soon talk about how you explain nekudah, how you make from a nekudah partzuf. That's a question, which we shall discuss. I want to finish it first before I say anything. What is bothering you?
Why the Shabbos? The nekudah to partzuf, you need it always.
On Shabbos you have more power, like anything.
It doesn't stay.
Lots of love.
So
What did Yaakov do?
Shabbos every day.
He didn't finish. He's still in the middle of a subject. Let's see where he goes. He didn't finish the subject, yeah. This is a little Kabbalist. Some chapters are more technical. This is a more technical. But we'll explain it, because it's all the understanding Yaakov. Let's continue. Now is a parenthesis. How long is the parenthesis? No, there's a parenthesis within the parenthesis. I think this is a quite long one, actually. Yes, there is.
It goes till canal towards the end of Vayishlach Beis. Like 18 lines up from the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay, long parentheses, so be it. You want to skip the parentheses and go? We'll learn the parentheses, as complicated as it is, so it makes no difference. Okay. Radlo, what? It's a level of ak. Ak as an Adam Kadman or Atika Kadisha? Which ak you mean?
Adam Kadman.
So it depends.
Atika Kadisha you have in every world.
Radlo you also have in every world. How do you like that? You didn't know that, huh? You have everything in all the worlds. Radlo is usually one of the levels of Atika Kadisha, Atik. So Adam Kadman has a level of Atik too. Depends how you're talking. Microcosm, macrocosm, it depends what level. You're just asking a general question. There's no black and white answer to that. You're asking me to simply want to know what shelf it belongs on in your kitchen. In your kitchen? Not that black and white. Vayishlach has a level in Atik. So here we go. Long parentheses. Look, he's grounding all these ideas that we learned. This actually, to me, is very helpful, this type of chapter, even though it's very technical, because it gives us the coordinates of what the whole thing is. It's not Havana so much, but it's the language. It's the levels. So that's going to help. So it's a little, you have to bear through it, but it's also part of this, and that's it. And so it's grounding it. He's all the sources. You see how many sources he's brought so far? Beauty, Hazeya, Meorei Ohr. This whole chapter is suddenly sources. It's almost like the sources for everything he's discussing.
And keser itself, no?
That the root of malchus is in radlo. Reisha de lo yisyad. That's an atik, obviously, as he says. Reisha de yisyad means a reisha, the head, that's not known. Sometimes it says it's not even known to itself. It's like the unconscious state. Just for the record, you want to know the relevance? We're now talking the building blocks of you and me. All this is a piece of you. Now the question is to find where it is inside of you. There's a malchus in you, there's the nekudah, there's the partzuf, there's radlo, there's what Yaakov does, there's what happens on Shabbos. So right now he's just mapping it out technically. But essentially this is like doctors speaking to each other. He's telling you that he's talking the medical terms, the spiritual medical terms of where these levels are.
That's what I'm asking.
Okay, but I just want to tell you what he's talking. But we first have to finish, then we can explain it. So right now he says malchus within us is rooted in radlo. He's explaining how does this process work. He just said like this: it starts with a nekudah, a point, a stone. The stone is turned into matzeivah full blown. We know this is a lower level because keser malchus is the nekudah. Now malchus is being matured. This is essentially the maturity of malchus, the growth of malchus. So even though it's lower, but it's rooted in higher, because the root of this growth is coming from higher forces. He says atik radlo. So if it's coming from higher forces, then I have many questions. So what's going on? Then it's not a nekudah. So he says no. Even though it's rooted there, think of it like a fetus. The first cell, when an egg is fertilized, is a nekudah. Even though it's rooted in radlo, the birth is rooted in the source, but when it comes, but practically, like he says here, how malchus emanates, how malchus emerges, It emerges as a point, a new moon, not a full moon, a new creation, a new birth, a new seed. Vayishlach, the parentheses in the parentheses. The li is that radlo b'chinas lo yada. That being that radlo is a level of lo yada. It's a level that's beyond knowledge, like unconscious. She'ena b'chinas muhus yadua ba'atzmei. It's not in a state of awareness yet, of consciousness. Even in itself, it's not in a state. K'mashakosov b'sidr b'pirush baruch sha'amar, which we learned earlier. Like it says in Sidr in the pirush of baruch sha'amar. What does it say there? That radlo. There he talked about Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam, and then there's Baruch Hu. Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam is still radlo, means it's not yet in a state of consciousness. An example for it in our personal lives is, like I give the example, right now we're conscious right now that you're sitting at a table and we're learning. If I asked you, what is your left leg doing? So now you think about it. But a second before, it was there, but you weren't conscious of it. There's a state of being that's not conscious of itself. Which means when a person is... so consciousness itself is already a revealed state. You're aware of something. But that doesn't mean it's the highest state. The highest state of everything is when you're not aware, actually. When it's just there, and you don't have to be aware of it for it to be there. Like that's where real reality resides. Did that make sense to you? If it didn't, we'll move on and we'll explain it later. Didn't make sense to you?
Yeah.
That's reality. Consciousness, awareness and consciousness is already a manifestation.
Toldos, what the Rabbi said about Toldos.
Right. Okay. So since it's a state of oh wow, that's amazing. It's gewaldic what he just said here. That's why malchus emanated in only like a nekudah that's not yet in any form of revelation. He's explaining something brilliant here. Why takanat? Why should a birth begin with a seed? Why not right away? It's coming from such a high level. Hey? Because it's higher than consciousness. It's higher than revelation. So what it manifests in is also something that's beyond revelation. So the nekudah that we consider to be total concealment is rooted in a total concealment from a positive place. Total unconscious state. You didn't get what I'm saying. Okay.
That's what it means.
You don't appreciate this? Very, very powerful line. The Levna Elyon transmutes into Levna Tachton. That's what Levna Elyon. Yep. No, he didn't say it. I'm just thinking out loud. Okay. But basically it works like this. When we see something is only very small, you can say, it's tiny. And when it grows into an adult, that's when it's going to be big. That's how we usually think, with our limited sensory tools. Small. Then we learn, I'm just giving you an example. Today we know that microscopic forces can be far more powerful than big armies. One nuclear reaction can be more powerful than a million soldiers and tanks and all that. We know one cell in the body, God forbid, becomes a mutation, can wreak unbelievable havoc. So we realize today that it's so when you see
It's in the nano.
Right. So the fact that you see it as small doesn't mean that it's small and weak. Okay. Now on the other hand, however, for example, a grain of sand, there are things that are small and there are things that are bigger. There are. So we can't always know when you look at something that's tiny how powerful it really is. Obviously everything has power, but I'm talking about. So the question is like this: when I'm using an example of a new child. When a new moon is born, when a new seed is fertilized, what do you have here? So someone with the naked eye say, I don't see anything. I just see a strand of hair. Yeah, but what you see here can end up being Moshe Rabbeinu and Mashiach, or Havdal of Havdalos. It could end up being Parai or Hitler. This little nothing, because in it is concentrated unbelievable force. What he's saying here is, why then does it emerge like in such a small nekudah? Why does it look so tiny? He says because its root is in a place that's beyond revelation. So when it manifests, it's also beyond revelation. In other words, the concentrated smallness of it is a testimony. If it came from Giluyim, then it would be large. But since it comes from a place that's higher than Giluyim, it's higher than consciousness, and even radlo is not even aware of itself. So when it manifests in a thing that doesn't have anything to hold on to.
But it gets built later.
That's another story. We're talking now how it emerges, how it begins.
You mean the vessel for this?
Unbelievable, Vart. I love this word. Major word. Look, in Aveda, it's a story with the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov says, Tfil ani ki yatif, lefnei Hashem yishpech sichi. I pray before God, ki yatif, lefnei Hashem, before God I pour out my words. So the Baal Shem Tov asks, why pray like a pauper? And what's lefnei Hashem? Like the pauper pours out his whole soul to God. So he gives an unbelievable example. Two people are invited to see a king, great king. One is a literate, educated person, full of giluyim. A literate, not nekudah. He's got all his pashtus. And the other one is a nekudah. He has nothing. He's illiterate. He's ignorant. Pauper. The first one comes in. He looks at the palace. He never saw a palace like this. He appreciates it all so much. He gets distracted. He starts reading the books, looking at the literature, listening to the music, taking in the beauty, and he misses his appointment with the king. The second one is a pauper. He's only a nekudah. He has nothing. So he doesn't appreciate anything. So he walks right through all the hecholas, through all the chambers, right into the king's chamber. Lifnei Hashem yishpech sich. If you suspend your literacy, suspend all your sophistication when you stand in front of the king. Be a nekudah. Like here, I did the Torah. Be completely in absorption, total bittul. That's malchus in the essence in Aveda. Now, when you're that way, you become a keli for the source. But it says also the opposite. The Baal Shem Tov says that the pshitus of atzmus is seen in the pshitus of a simple person. But you could say, what does that mean? Pshitus of a simple person. He's ignorant, has no giluyim, doesn't have avodah, doesn't have askala, doesn't have anything. He's just a simple person. But his simplicity, the fact that he has nothing, is somewhat a reflection of God who has everything and is beyond everything. So beyond everything and not having everything has a connection. That's the point. And everything in between is giluyim. Innocence. There's no simplicity. So the simplicity, the shapelessness. I was just reading one of the Maimorim, the Mittler Rebbe, where he speaks about this whole thing with Levushim and Kalim. He says something, I never saw it quite that way. He says, if you talk from Atzma's point of view, he says either or. It's either infinite spheres or it's no spheres. The idea of something to be defined, that's already, it's either it just extends infinitely or there's not, or that's beyond it all. And he says it's the same thing. Infinite, in other words, when something has no definition, it manifests in no definition. So the no definition of the nekudah of a spark is manifesting so-called the beyond infinity of the source. That's what he's saying here. So malchus as a nekudah, this is a yesh leimer. I never saw this as a pretty interesting. There's a lot that can be learned from this. In other words, we're not asking now. We understand that a concentrated nekudah has a lot in it, but why does it have to come as a nekudah? Why can't it immediately express itself? Because it's coming from a place that expression is not even a virtue. That's the point.
Because it's so wide.
That's why it comes in nekudah. Okay, so that's why malchus on its own starts like a nekudah. This is all this parentheses explaining this whole thing. In order for there to be a spashus hamalchus, malchus should spread out, should expand.
Spashus means going to be it.
Well, I hear it's talking about building it into a partzuf, not necessarily. He's talking about building it into a partzuf, into a matzeivah. That malchus should have not just keser, but chochmah bina. Binyan ha-malchus. This to be revealed, this you already need a higher level. So in other words, the new moon, why do we celebrate Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh, you could say, one second, Rosh Chodesh is almost nothing there. The 15th day of the month, that's when you should be celebrating. But Rosh Chodesh is what we celebrate, because in that spark lies radlo. 15th of the month lies the Giluyim, the revelation of it. But it begins, and what we honor is Rosh Chodesh. HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem was in the beginning of the month.
Well, what are these words that
okay.
So maybe the 15th should be a bigger something.
That's another story. We're talking two different things.
Right after the French.
What? You didn't hear what I just answered because you're not listening. I told you, so what? So we celebrate the 15th too.
Also, that's what
But Rosh Chodesh has that's a different virtue. That's the virtue of revelation.
But he said just
anyway, bottom line is, one second, so it's coming.
Then it's a nekudah. If he said a higher level being his spashus,
he didn't say that.
Here said it in the scene.
Let's go back. Keep the flow here. Keep the flow. He started off saying very simple that malchus is a nekudah on its own, and in order for it to expand, that requires the avodah making the matzeivah. That's a work. Now expansion is a lower level. However, to make it expand, you need to come and reach something beyond to bring it down. That's where he brought the Zayar. That you need to have a seis of kadishin ubarchan milaela in order from the nekudah should be extended. 1 second, you asked something, and I'm answering you. You want an answer or you don't want an answer? I'm telling you the answer. That's simple. Now he said, it works like this. Malchus itself is rooted in radlo. That's why it's a nekudah. Now you want to make it extend outward. So now we need to have something higher to make it extend. But that higher is not in malchus. That's coming from a level outside of malchus. That's what's going to be Yaakov doing that. Malchus begins as a radlo. If you want it to expand, you need some type of power. Kadish nebuchon leila is not from malchus. Malchus is rooted in radlo. That's it.
Radlo is a very high shayla.
It's like he said before. It's keser of malchus, but it's higher than keser of malchus. This yesod, this 9 spheres before malchus.
Yeah, but if you have a high shayla, it should be not.
You didn't hear what I just said. This is keser of malchus, radlo of malchus. There's levels higher than that. There's all the malchus is still a moon. It's not the sun. The sun is higher than the
Malchus of malchus. The Kina comes from a different place.
Well, if you all had patience, he's going to spell it all out. Well, I mean, he's explaining this. That's what he's saying here. And like we find the Nehi Chadashim Dezah. This is again a Kabbalistic level, which I'll explain for a moment. What time do we have?
11:19.
Like we find Nehi Chadashim Dezah. What is Nehi Chadashim Dezah? Goes like this. Zah is the Midas. Zoyer Ampin. The 6 Midas. They have their general transmission of energy. And then there's a thing called Nehi Chadashim, which means that when the Midas have an abundant energy, let's say like on Shabbos or something like that, there's a birth of a new Nehi. So that's a level in Kabbalah. Nimshachim in keser. So it says in Kabbalah that when that newness comes, that comes from keser, from the crown. So he's explaining now. The birdei lashpia tzarich li sheirish hamshach madrega al yeni yeser. When you study on your own, you have a certain level of concentration. If you have to mashpia and transmit to others, you need a hamshach, you have to go dig deeper and bring a draw down from a deeper place, from a higher place. Kolshkein, the b'chinas malchus, who b'chdei li is binyan malchus, b'chinas partzuf, tzarich li is hamshach madrega al yeni yeser. So he's bringing an example. If Nehi Chadashim needs to have something from keser, and it's not enough the regular transmission, so for sure malchus, which is a lower level than Nehi, is malchus, which is nekudah. For it to become a partzuf, for it to be built into a whole full-bodied entity, it needs to have a higher transmission than malchus has. To put it simply like this, malchus is a nekudah, it's like the moon. By the Rosh Chodesh, it's a new moon, it's a complete bittul. It's a very high level, because it's rooted in radlo. But now you want the moon to grow. Where's it going to grow from? The nekudah is satisfied with its state. So you need something to make this grow. You want malchus to now transmit. You want the moon to give off light. So you need to reach into a higher level. And physically it would be the sun in this example. What the level is, we'll find out. Clearly this is going to be Yaakov's avodah, because the even is the nekudah. But binyan and malchus is a work. We have to build malchus. How do you build it? So the building of it is a lower level than the actual nekudah. The nekudah is the higher level, but the building requires a certain effort. It's like the teacher may have it all concentrated in a point inside of him, but now he has to teach it. So he needs to find something outside of himself, a higher dimension that will so-called force it to transmit.
Why do you have to say the Evan is the nekudah?
It says in Meorei Ohr, Evan is the nekudah. He made it very clear. The Evan is the nekudah. You have to. I mean, why do you have to say there's an Evan if you're going to ask questions?
But otherwise, when you're saying that Yaakov built a malchus, you could say by putting the Evan, he built a malchus.
Well, listen, he's bringing very reliable sources here.
He took it.
Yeah.
He took took the nekudah and he raised it to its source. From that, it's something to throw down higher.
You have to remember, Teda midaberes bel yenim. The whole story is not a story that happened about. Yaakov was not busy with stones and mounds. Who really cared? It's all spiritual levels. It manifests in stones, and stuff like that.
This stone is the Evan.
Next time you walk on the sidewalk, realize what you're walking on. That's the point. Even though this is man-made stones, but that's another story. Yeah.
But stones are like that by themselves. Don't you have to make them into matzeivahs?
Why don't we continue learning and we'll find out. This is going somewhere.
Because you said immediately the next time I walk outside, I have to think about these things.
Because we may not end this chapter before today, so that's why I'm saying that.
You don't know what you're walking in.
Listen, this is a long parenthesis that is very Kabbalistic, but if you go painstakingly through it, we'll get ideas out of it. I'm making sure we're aligned with what we're learning. This is the key. This is all details in the picture. Remember, the bottom line is we're taking from a stone and we're turning it into a partzuf. We're taking an evan and turning it into matzeivah. He's talking now the details of how this is done. We can say now in Eitz Chaim there in Hagah. Which Eitz Chaim? He brought an Eitz Chaim earlier. You remember an Eitz Chaim? Yeah. Eitz Chaim Shar Arei Champin, at the beginning of the parentheses. The Sheresh malchus radlo. Okay. In the Hagah, in the gloss there, he says like this. Makshe or Makasher? I think it's Makshe. He asks a question. Mebir ha'idrezuta. The mebchinas nehida ati kadish nasa b'chinas malchus da arei champin. Yeah, he asks a question. If malchus is rooted in radlo, why does it say in idrezuta? Idrezuta is essentially is idre rabbi idre zutra. It's like the small group and this large group. There's the two idre zuta. Idre zuta, two sections of the Zohar. Idre zuta is in Parasha Hazinu, where it talks about Rashbi's passing. Idre means when he gathered together his talmidim. And Idre Rabba is a big gathering, which was in Parsha Nosei. So this, when you say Idre Rabba, it means it's a section in Zohar Parsha Nosei, and Idre Zuta is a section in Parsha Hazinu. She says, he's asked there in the Hagah, you just said Malchus is rooted in radlo. In Zohar there, the Mechinas Nehid Akti Krish Nasa Mechinas Malchus Darei Champin. I don't know if it's Maksha or Mekasher.
You said now.
I have to look it up. Because I think it's Maksha. I have to look it up in Eitz Chaim. You want to bring me the Eitz Chaim? It's right here. Let me see. On the bottom there.
They should write the word until the end. The printers.
Well, the Rebbe Rashab, they didn't change what the Rebbe Rashab did. And you know something? Nice is safer than Nechza. That's why we are, thank God, intelligent to look inside. Arichampin, Ayin Beis.
Have it in print?
This is in print. Shad Arichampin, Ayin Beis. Let's see. If you don't mind, with a little Kabbalistic insights here. If you think this is complicated, learn a little Eitz Chaim.
It's the Israel.
I really need reading glasses. It's ridiculous. Okay.
Oh, that's what I asked, but he said that the Rabbi was malchus.
So why did they do these things? Hafil and everything. They always write to
They don't want everybody learning it.
They didn't want everybody learning that way too.
Okay. First of all, the Hagah is not so obvious where the Hagah is. Okay. Oh yeah, here we go.
What do you want? The Rabbi want?
It's not the Zohar part.
But he brings down here, we didn't want people to learn.
But he does it in his regular stuff too.
It's thing.
He does it in his regular stuff. He doesn't only make these, there's always these.
Oh, my mistake. This is okay. Finally, Rosh Davis I didn't get right.
Yeah.
I know why. There's a mistake here. That's why. Mahagdomas. That's what it says here. The Hagdomas, he says here like this. Look. Let me just see it. Let me just saw it. 1 second. One second, what happened here? I just saw it.
Still have some from the handwriting.
So for the paper, basically, that's.
I mean, that even if a little bit of drop goes into these was answers. I'm almost talking.
We go in yeshiva with all this handwriting, we get used to it.
So you don't see it until.
Oh, here we are. Bagdomas bir idrezutra. That's what it says here. Bagdomas bir idrezutra. Magdomas bir idrezutra. That's the mem kuf. No, the hey, mem hey kuf is probably should say. That's why I thought maksha. But it says bagdomas bir idrezutra. Behagdomas bir idrezutra. Mekdomas bir idrezutra b'chinas nehidat. There's nasem b'chinas. Okay, so it's not a question. He's just saying that there it says that from the nekudah nasem b'chinas malchus darichampen. Well, if he's yeshlem the imay is the malchus radlo and the b'chinas chitzenius, and according to this we can say that even though malchus is rooted in radlo, I know that's the outer level of malchus. V'sherish dispashtusim b'chinas apnimis. Okay, this is getting now far more complicated. And I would.
Half a line is a routine.
Okay, this I would stop here because this needs its own discussion. It's not going to be 2 minutes. I got to study it a little myself. So let's stop here. We're middle of the parentheses. We did chapter 109, page 210, and we'll continue and we'll take it from there.